In this lesson, we're going to compare Pamalogy with other philosophical systems. And I have a confession to make. I really don't like philosophy. What is philosophy? Well, the word itself just means love of wisdom, philosophia. Nothing wrong with that. But actually, it really all boils down to disputing stuff. And I really don't like endless, irresolvable disputes. Do you? There's a good reason for all the arguing, though. Philosophy attempts to discuss really hard questions we don't always have answers for, and where there's a lot of different opinions, and there's arguments towards why things might be so. Things that we don't have answers for sometimes. Now, back in the Greek days, most of the arguing centered on physics, and so we came up with something called metaphysics. Democritus argued against Parmenides about atoms. Parmenides thought change required the appearance of matter from nothing, and Democritus envisioned a variety of small little particles with hooks that attracted clusters that would move about in a void. And he called those things atoms, right? So we've heard of that before, and there's nothing wrong with that theory. We might think it was right, but they were both wrong. Modern physics has all but replaced their theories, having demonstrated something called electromagnetism. And we still believe in atoms, but of a very different sort. Other philosophers of those days thought the basic elements of the world were maybe made out of fire, air, water, earth, and the theories were plentiful. Philosophers also argued over what constituted right and wrong. A big issue. Parmenides was a sophist. The sophists were moral relativists. What was good in Athens wasn't necessarily good in Sparta. Plato often disputed with the sophists. Moral reasoning took as many forms as theories about physics. And persuasion involved certain rules of logic that opponents came to appreciate and similarly analyze. Pamalogy wants to use those systems of logic. Now, when Plato used the word knowledge, he was referring to certainty that can be gained through proof. But each premise leading to any conclusion also had to be proven true, didn't it? Otherwise, a thing remained uncertain. Plato realized that this created a recursive problem that always demanded proof of a yet earlier set of provable premises. And the only way he could resolve it was to suppose that knowledge is ultimately acquired in the pre-existence of a soul. Noam Chomsky is a modern analytical philosopher and a linguist who argued for commonality in human understanding. Maybe there is hope for us to come to agreement after all. And I'd like to think so. The branch of philosophy dedicated to understanding how we know things is called epistemology. The skeptics are often accused of coming along and destroying any argument by challenging the ability to know anything at all. Ultimately, we wind up with nihilism. Then, in addition to metaphysics and epistemology, philosophy offers something called axiology, which is the logic behind what is good. Axiology involves the study of ethics, what's right and wrong, and of beauty, aesthetics. It may say things like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You've heard that before, right? Now, Pamalogy assumes the purpose of conscious perception and of all things is maximized awesomeness, both in an absolute sense as judged by perfection itself, and in the individual challenge to become the best that we can be to maximize our personal awesomeness. If we're to enter into an applied Pamalogy, one that offers true guidance in individual and corporate awesomization, a rational basis for considering ethics and aesthetics is required. And in many ways, this is where Pamalogy meets traditional philosophy. What makes it different is its well-defined, overarching teleology. Now, teleology is purpose. In plain English, maximized awesomeness is the purpose and end of all things, of which we are conscious perceivers and taking part. Maximized awesomeness, perfection, having come to understand that it is real, colors the rest of our discussion. I like philosophy a lot more that way. Nihilism is done away with. Existentialism is welcome, but our existentialists aren't lost in a world where God is presumed dead. We each discover our specific purpose. What is existentialism? Well, it can be contrasted with Aristotle's essentialism. Aristotle looked for the essence of things. In his opinion, everything had a distinct purpose that set it apart from other things, gave it a name, distinguished it. Mankind he would classify as an animal that reasoned, a rational animal. He concluded that rational thinking was man's purpose, and the mind was to rule over the body if man was to do what was right. That's what made him distinct from the other animals. Saints Augustine and Thomas Aquinas amplified Aristotle's essentialism as they developed natural law and considered divine law, looking at the essential distinguishing features of things as their reason for being, according to their essence. And Catholic scholastics took those ideas to extremes. Sexual instinct, for instance, was particularly looked down upon as opposed to rational purpose, including the purpose of sex, which they saw as being limited to procreation. A unitive benefit of sex between married partners, where they were enjoying it and becoming closer, was also acknowledged but often lost in the fine print. Now, modern philosophers challenged essentialism. The existentialists, they're called, came along and they argued that we as creatures exist first and that we have the power to determine what we will become secondarily. We can discover our reason and our purpose. We're undefined beings. Therefore, we can determine our own purpose. Now, as we looked for a Pamologist's code of conduct in our last lesson, I thought I'd provide just a feel for it. Pamalogy is not about the sage words of a religious cult leader. It's about the norms of logic, which means it includes all of philosophical thinking. And in the truest and simplest sense of the phrase, Pamalogy is the logical philosophy of perfection. We therefore must look at Pamalogy through a philosopher's eyes. So let's review. We conclude that perfection is real based on the following 5 premises. Premise number 1, all possibility always exists as all possibility abstractly and independently of whether any universes illustrate any of it. Premise number 2, all possibility in abstraction includes the possibility of perfection, defined as that which contains all possible and impossible and all conceivable and inconceivable good things while excluding anything bad. Premise number 3, all possibility in abstraction includes the possibility of including some means of achieving perfection as a realization from abstraction. That's a possibility. And premise 4, all possibility in abstraction can be divided into obligatory and non-obligatory possibility. Obligatory possibility being that which contains all manner of good that is required for perfection. And premise 5, it's good that perfection, whether as an abstract possibility or as a realized possibility, should possess an awareness of such an obligation. This brings us to our conclusion. Possessing both the awareness of its moral obligation and the knowledge of how to achieve perfection from pure abstraction, perfection most certainly would have realized itself from all eternity. An argument in some ways similar to this is by Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it's well known to many philosophers. Anselm argued from the basis of understanding, saying that if both he and an unbeliever could understand the concept of God as that which includes all that can possibly be good, that in the concept itself exists the truth that reality is even better than concept. Therefore, God must be real. Now, I'll agree with Anselm that reality of the perfectly good thing, which he called God, is better than the concept alone. However, Anselm doesn't speak of the means, which is my third premise. His argument from concept, I think, could be improved as pure abstract possibility. He also gets caught up in communicating what is conceived in the mind with another person, as if words and ideas communicated were part of the proof. In a sense, proof does involve persuasion and therefore effective communication of ideas. But in an absolute sense, truth doesn't require awareness by even one single person, not one single conscious perceiver. What I'm saying is that it exists within all possibility under any condition, whether anyone is aware of it or not. It remains for the philosopher to question the strength of each premise that I've just given you. On what basis do I say that all possibility exists abstractly at all times and doesn't change? Can that notion be proven? Does it have to be proven? Is it a tautology? A tautology is a self-proving statement like, all dogs are either blue or they are not blue. It has something of the certainty of mathematics. The totality of possibility equals the totality of possibility. It's a self-evident statement. But like I said, philosophy delights in disputing things. And if there was absolutely nothing, no fields, no energy, no matter, no gravity, no particles, not anything at all in any universe, not even a vacuum, and no matter or antimatter fluctuating or fluid fields really zero, would all possibility still exist as purely abstract possibility? And I would say yes. It's a constant. Does a perceiver need to be aware of possibility abstractly for abstract possibility to exist? Well, let's take an example. If everyone in a classroom gets a math equation wrong, is the math wrong? Or are the students in the classrooms wrong? If they're unanimous, does their answer make the math right or wrong? If every scientist and every person in the world thinks the world is flat, does that make the world flat? They can certainly imagine the world is flat, but that doesn't make it so. In the same way, abstract possibility is not subject to opinion or conscious perception. It's a constant that exists independently of opinion. Therefore, my premise is valid. The rules of logic which belong to philosophy similarly apply to each of the second through fifth premises that I presented. I'm not going to belabor the point by going through each one. Perfection, that is the way that I've defined it, is a subset of all possibility. It's always such under any condition. So, also, is the realization of perfection always a possibility. So also is the self-knowledge of perfection. So also is the knowledge of the means of the self-realization of perfection. So also is the knowledge of the obligation of perfection to realize itself, since it can. All these premises always exist within abstract possibility. It's then the knowledge of the means of performing the abstraction, making itself real, that makes perfection obligatory of itself. It thus makes itself real. Perfection is real. This is very good news. Better yet, there could not possibly be any better news that I could have to share with you. News this wonderful is unfortunately very much dulled by philosophy and disputes and criticism and the weaknesses of any opinion looking for ways to refute any argument. Because this isn't about refutation, it's about the good news of perfection. Philosophers will continue what they will. There will always be someone saying nothing can be known. But I'm satisfied with the logic of perfection. I'm convinced that it really exists for the reasons I've explained. And I like to think on that, and I like what it means for us. In applied Pamalogy, we'll spend less time on the refutation of perfection itself and more time on the consideration of things like ethics and aesthetics, on axiology. And our goal will be to determine what rational basis there might be for discerning between good and bad things so that we can achieve maximum awesomeness in our lives, both as individuals and as communities. And that's going to lead to what we will call Pamalonomies. A Pamalonomy is a society of Pamalogists working together as community to maximize awesomeness. Together, we can change the world, and it's going to be awesome.